It also changes everybody else on the roster, not just Godwin, not just Evans, but now Levante David becomes a household name. Now Devin White gets his moment in the sun. Now Byron Leftwich, an offensive coordinator, has all eyes on him, where he suddenly becomes a head coaching candidate if the Buccaneers do well. It just rises everybody up, and it puts them in a different conversation. The Buccaneers played one primetime game last season, one. And it was on week 2 against the Carolina Panthers. And you guys don't remember it because it was early in the season. There was a rain delay. It was a forgettable game against Cam and Jamin. Now they're on 5 different times in primetime. They're the biggest premier game on Sunday afternoon, week 1, when they start things off in New Orleans. They are a household nationwide team right now. For better or for worse, we will know Chris Godwin. We will know Mike Evans. We might know 20 guys on that team because we are going to be force-fed the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That's what Tom Brady does. He's going to be in your television set every single week. And you bet it's not just on the games. We're starting our show 7 a.m. in the middle of May talking Tom Brady, and it's going to be like that all season long.
This is the Big Nasty. Yeah, Big Nasty, Hall of Fame Tampa Bay Buccaneer fan, baby.
This is Mike Allstott, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and you're listening to the Cannon Fire Podcast.
Cannon Fire Podcast, brother. You ain't listening, and you're missing out. Woo!
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to a brand new edition of the Cannon Fire Podcast. Back at you today for episode 114. The NFL schedule was released not too long ago. We're going to talk about that today. Go over some of the latest and greatest Buc news, what people are talking about in the media regarding Tom Brady and his adjustment period in Tampa Bay. Plus much more. We've got a great show lined up for you. I am your host, as always, Rhett Mustache Matthew. Joined alongside me, as always, my good buddy and co-host, the Philly Bucs fan himself, Mr. Evan Wanish. And we have a very special guest on the show today, joining us for the first time ever. It seems like we've had just about everybody from Pewter Report on the show, except for this guy. So here he is, making his debut, Mr. Matt Matera, a beat writer for Pewter Report, and of course a producer of the Pewter Nation podcast as well. You can listen to him there. How's everybody doing today?
I'm doing great, saving the best for last, so thank you guys for having me on.
Absolutely. Had a good time talking to you at the Shrine game earlier this year, and it just kind of put the seed in my head that we definitely need to have you on sometime to talk some Buccaneer football, and what better time than right now, because everybody has all this free time on their hands, so of course here we are. Evan, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
I am doing good. I'm actually really excited for the show today, not because we have a ton to talk about, but I don't know. Like, I miss doing the podcast once a week, twice a week, when we had regular news rolling in. And especially now that I'm just not really working, I've got all this time on my hands. All I think about is sitting here doing the show. So I'm excited to actually be here doing the show, and I'm excited for a lot of what we have to talk about today. So let's just jump right into it. The NFL schedule came out. The Buccaneers got a schedule that, frankly, we haven't seen for the Bucs in quite some time. They got 5 primetime games, the max that you can get on a schedule. So other than the 5 primetime games, I'll ask you, Matt, first. Does anything stick out to you on this schedule? Like, did you look at it and, like I said, aside from the 5 primetime games, was there anything that just really was interesting to you?
Yeah, I thought it was kind of interesting. I mean, right off the bat, first game for Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski as Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Matchups of the season going to New Orleans to begin the year. I mean, it really doesn't get that much tougher than going up against Drew Brees, and this rivalry has kind of been ratcheted up a little bit with, the Bucs being kind of the number one contender to take the Saints crown, and now Jameis Winston is the backup quarterback for the Saints. So that was really the first thing that kind of stuck out to me. The other thing, it's not necessarily an opponent, but the bye week is very late for the Bucs. It's week 13. I believe that's the first week of December. So the Bucs are a fairly young team outside of guys like Tom Brady. But I'm wondering how much of that wear and tear, given all the different times and the different primetime games, how much that'll really affect the Bucs in later games in the season right before they get to that bye.
Yeah. What do you think, Evan? What jumps out to you on the schedule?
Yeah, I was going to say the bye week. I believe the Bucs and Panthers are the only two teams in the NFL with a Week 13 bye week. And in the past, it used to actually be, I believe, Week 12 was the last week you could have a bye week. So that's actually changed this year, and it is a very late bye week, which could be good and could be bad. It could be good because maybe that propels them to a playoff push. Them last 4 or 5 games there, they get a little rest there before the playoffs. But it also could be bad because, by Week 13, a lot of these guys' bodies are just going to be wore down, and hopefully that doesn't result in losing some games that you really shouldn't.
Yeah, absolutely. When I look at the schedule as a whole, it doesn't have us playing on the road 6 weeks in a row. It doesn't have no bye week at all. It is a late bye week, and you kind of brought up the cautious side of that, which could go either way. I think there's 2 ways of looking at it. Like, the perspective that I've heard the most from people who want to spin this into a positive thing is that it kind of gives them a little bit of a rest before that final 4-game push towards the playoff if they're in that kind of position. And I don't want to say they have 4 easy games coming out of that stretch, because you look at Minnesota, I think out of those 4 final games, that'll be the biggest challenge. But after Minnesota, they've got Atlanta, Detroit, and then Atlanta again. I don't know how confident people feel about us playing Atlanta, but I don't know. I think it's a nice little 4-game stretch if we are in playoff contention by that point. Let me run through the schedule really quick. We're not going to break it down game by game, but I wanted to get your guys' games that you might be looking forward to this year, anything that you want to see in particular. So here we go. Week 1, we had brought up that they are on the road against the New Orleans Saints in the Superdome. That is Sunday, September 13th, 4:25 p.m. And the last time the Buccaneers opened up in New Orleans, they gave us probably one of the most exciting games I've ever watched in my lifetime. So I'm looking forward to what can happen there in Week 1. Week 2, they play the Carolina Panthers, open up things at home. That's a 1 o'clock game. Week 3, they travel to Denver, taking on the Broncos. That is a 4:25 game. Week 4, it is the LA Chargers. They are playing them in Raymond James, October 4th. That's a 1 p.m. game. After that, they are on the road to the Chicago Bears, and I believe that is a primetime game, if I'm not mistaken. That's a Thursday night game?
Yep, Thursday Night Football.
Looking forward to that one. After that, they are back home against the Green Bay Packers, and this is a game that I think this is my most anticipated game on the schedule. When I saw that we were going to be playing the Packers this year, I was really, really hoping that it would be under the lights. And I guess part of it still can be because it is a 4:25 kickoff, but I wanted Monday Night Football under the lights, Packers, Bucs, like the old NFC Central late 90s days. There's just nothing more nostalgic for me than that. And I never even went to those games, so I don't know why I'm nostalgic about it. But I'm really looking forward to that game. After they play the Packers at home, they head out west to play the Raiders in Las Vegas. That is Sunday Night Football, 8:20 p.m.
It's the first of 3 straight primetime games.
Yes, It is, actually. After that, they got the New York Giants. That is a Monday night game. That is in New York. That is November 2nd. And then the 3rd straight primetime game, they are playing New Orleans once again, Week 9 in Raymond James Stadium on Sunday Night Football. That'll be a good matchup. Following the Saints, they go to the Carolina Panthers, Sunday, November 15th. That's a 1 o'clock game. After that, they've got 2 straight home games before the bye week. The first of those 2 is the LA Rams. That's a Monday Night Football game. And then after that, they have got the defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs, November 29th at 4:25 p.m. Do you think there's a possibility that game gets flexed? I know that was a hot topic when people saw that it was a 4 o'clock game. What do you think?
It certainly has a possibility. It's 2 high-profile quarterbacks, arguably 2 of the best in the league right now. It's late enough in the season where it definitely could get flexed. The Bucs already have 5 primetime games, but I know last year, I believe it was the Packers and the Steelers played 6, so there's definitely that possibility. I don't know about, because Week 12, you still got a couple more. You would have to see who else is playing that week is really what it comes down to.
Right.
I was almost surprised, though, that this game wasn't prime time to begin with. Brady Mahomes, everyone loved that AFC Championship game from 2 years ago. But I guess, too, you can look later down at the schedule, and even 2 weeks later, Bucs-Vikings could potentially be a game that gets flexed to Sunday Night Football, because that could be 2 teams where they're fighting to win their own division, let alone fight for one of the wild card spots. So I think there's a lot of room for another game to get flexed. I mean, who knows? The Falcons ended up with the same record as the Bucs did a season ago. So I could see a scenario where the Falcons are either like egregiously bad or surprisingly really good, and they could be contending for a wild card spot. So there's a lot of room late in the schedule to see another Bucs game get flexed to Sunday night.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people would look for and to see Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady, as you brought up, two of probably the best in the league right now. A matchup I'm sure plenty of people nationwide will want to see. So after that game, we go into Week 13, the bye week that we had just covered, and then that last 4-game stretch, they play the Vikings at home. That's a 1 o'clock game, and then they are on the road 2 weeks in a row. They play the Falcons. They play the Lions on a date that is yet to be determined, but it's either going to be December 26th or the 27th. And then to wrap up the season, they finish it in Raymond James against Atlanta for what, like the third year in a row?
I think it's the third, yeah.
Seems like it.
Yeah, hopefully they don't blow this one, just like they always seem to do at the end of the season. But of course, I am talking about this way too early. So we went over the schedule, and I wanted to ask you guys, what are some games in particular that you've really got your eye on? I talked about the Green Bay game I'm looking forward to. I think it will be very competitive. I hope Aaron Rodgers shows up to play. But what are you guys looking forward to on this schedule? Evan, you go ahead and go first.
I'm looking forward to that Oakland game. It's on Vegas. Sorry, it's under the lights. It's in Vegas. Of course, John Gruden's he's coaching his old team with his team that he got traded from. It's the only two teams that he's been the head coach of, and this is going to be the first time that he's playing the Bucs since he returned to the NFL. Of course, there was rumors of him coming back to coach the Bucs, and that obviously didn't happen. This is the first time he's going to be able to play the team he won the Super Bowl with. The last time he's going to be on the same field with them, but until he was fired in 2008, I believe. So, that's Sunday Night Football. I think the Raiders will be a decent team. I think I don't think they'll be horrible. So I think it should make for a pretty solid game. So I would say that's the one I'm really looking forward to the most.
So I'm going to cheat a little bit here because I think there's portions of the schedule that are so intriguing for a number of different reasons. So I'm going to cheat a little and not technically take a specific game, but I'll tell you what I find interesting about the front half of the schedule. I mean, outside of New Orleans week 1, from weeks 2 to 5, that's going to be so interesting to me because these are winnable games for the Bucs, and that part of the schedule is going to be really important because, all right, listen, we all know what this offense can look like with Tom Brady throwing to Mike Evans and throwing to Chris Godwin and reuniting with Rob Gronkowski. We know what it could look like, and it could be a great offense. But the reality is that's not going to happen right away, especially with training camp up in the air for we don't know when it's going to happen. So weeks 2 through 5 are both winnable games, but they're very important for particularly the Bucs offense to really kind of find its bearings, get their legs under them, and really figure out how they're going to work and gel together and really find that chemistry. So I find that very important for the Buccaneers in the beginning of the schedule. Then you go weeks 7 and 8, at the Raiders and then at the Giants. You're going all the way from the West Coast, then all the way to the East Coast on a Monday. So then you have a shorter week going up against the Saints for that third primetime game in a row. So that's a bit of the travel schedule that really is interesting that comes into play. And then from week 9 to pretty much week 12, those are some heavy hitting matchups right there. Primetime against the Saints. The Panthers, not the toughest game, but it's a divisional game. And then the Rams and the Chiefs, I mean, that's as difficult as it really gets on the schedule. So, again, I know I kind of took liberties there, but there's so many different parts of this schedule that are interesting in their own way.
No, I think the more angles you can look at it, the better. So those are some excellent points you had brought up. And you brought up that first stretch of games between weeks 2 and 5. You kind of briefly mentioned this team kind of getting ahead of steam, kind of gelling, Tom Brady figuring out the offense, hopefully coming into what we hope they can be by that time of the season. But that leads me to my follow-up question, actually. A little earlier this week, Eli Manning and Shannon Sharp They're both predicting a bumpy start for Brady and the Bucs, quote unquote. You know me, Evan. You call me the eternal optimist all the time, and I will wear that badge with pride. But I'm just going to throw it out there. It wouldn't shock me if we have to see some sort of adjustment period for Brady throughout the first half of the year. I mean, you look at all the factors going into it, different terminology, different lingo that he just didn't have in New England, where he was for 20 freaking years. So I'm not saying it's going to be a disaster, but I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on it of what that transition period might look like and how long you think it'll last. Because it's great that we got Tom Brady. I'm so excited. I'm on the train. I'm a believer, but I have a very hard time believing that this team is going to be exactly where they want to be through weeks 1 through 4. Like, how long do you think that adjustment period will take, if you think there is one at all?
I mean, I think it could take, I don't know, but see, the thing is, just like Matt said earlier, starting week 1 in New Orleans, that's not a recipe for success.
Hey, New Orleans is never a team that plays to their top potential the first 2 weeks of the season. It seems like they always let one of those games go that they shouldn't, so who knows? We could sneak one up on them. Sloppy football.
I definitely think that they could. It's just for an offense, especially if there's fans allowed to the stadiums, for an offense that's still trying to gel, that New Orleans crowd is going to be difficult, and it's going to be very difficult. And then, just like Matt said, you got an important stretch there of weeks 2 to 5, where you play some okay teams. You play the Panthers, who, it is a divisional game, but I don't think they'll be that great. The Broncos, the Chargers, and the Bears, all those games, yeah, I do think there's an adjustment period there. And I think it'll probably take the first 5 weeks or so. I think by week 6, week 7, they should have their bearings. But, I mean, you just don't know because, is there going to be a training camp? Is there going to be a preseason? You don't know at this point, and those things are pivotal, especially for this type of situation. Quarterback's the most important position, and just like you said, he was in the same system for 20 years. I know he's a smart guy; he'll be able to pick it up. But chemistry with the receivers, that's a big deal as well. So I think and also if the Bucs want to contend this year for a playoff spot, weeks 2 through 5, they're going to need to win most of those games. They are. They're it doesn't matter if the offense is still getting rolling or not. They're going to have to win probably at least 3 or 4 of those games to be serious playoff contenders. So it'll be interesting to see. But I think the first 5 weeks or so will be the real feeling out period.
Yeah, I think it's going to take after week 3, because starting that week 4 game, it's in October, and people normally say that the month of September is kind of the worst month for football because teams are really starting to figure out the kinks and everything like that. So the calendar changes. You get to October, and in the meantime, I think these first couple of games, they're going to be won by the defense, because you look at Carolina and they're in a transition. They got a new coach with Matt Rule. They're kind of in a similar boat in terms of trying to get chemistry with Teddy Bridgewater and the new receivers. Denver, I mean, Drew Lock, he had a good run last year, but for the most part, he's still an unproven quarterback in this league. And then you go to week 4, I was about to say San Diego, but it's Los Angeles. Who knows who's going to be the quarterback? It could be Tyrod Taylor. It could be Justin Herbert, who they just drafted from Oregon. So I think the defense is really going to start really get the Bucs those wins to begin the season. But I guess to further answer your question, yeah, it's going to take some time just because Brady, at least, sorry, let me backtrack. Bruce Arians said in one of his press conferences lately that it's more going to be Tom Brady learning the Bucs offense, let alone instead of Bruce Arians making this whole offense that's catered to Tom Brady, because you're asking one guy to learn a playbook versus 52 other guys to learn a playbook just for one guy. With that said, I mean, no one in the NFL works harder than Tom Brady. I mean, he's still playing at a high level at his age. So if anyone's going to be ahead of the curve and kind of understand the playbook, figure things out, it's going to be Tom Brady. And that's why I think the transition to hitting their stride won't take as long as maybe it would for a rookie quarterback or, an average run-of-the-mill quarterback. So I say around after week 3 is when you really start seeing the Bucs offense pick it up, and then they are the reasons why they're winning some games later on in the season.
Okay.
Yeah, and Matt, that Week 5 game against the Bears have a tough defense that might be tough for the Bucs offense. It's in Chicago, but just like you said with the Bucs defense, you don't know who the Bears QB is going to be either.
Exactly.
That's
another perfect example right there.
You just don't know. So the defense is definitely going to, just like you said, I think is going to have to win them some games. It's nice to have Denver, I think, earlier in the year. Doesn't really give Drew Lock in the offense. They got Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler. It's 2 rookie wide receivers. Doesn't really give them much time to gel. So I think that's a positive that you got Denver early in the year as well.
So let me take that same question about the offense and that adjustment period we talked about and flip it over to the other side of the ball. With this defense, where do you expect them to pick up week 1? Because I feel more confident in the defensive line. I'm really glad they were able to keep those front 7 together. That was, one of their main priorities. I think top of the list going into the offseason. They're able to make that happen. So I have to believe that maybe Shaq Barrett will slow down. Teams have more film on him to look at. They might even be going back and looking at Denver stuff. But teams are studying him more. Where do you expect this defense to be, and is there an adjustment period for them? Because, like I said, I'm confident in the defensive line, but it's really up to the secondary. Because we saw last year, it took those guys a little over half the season to really figure out what they were doing back there. So can we expect them to pick up where they left off, or what's the adjustment period like there, Matt?
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said about the secondary, and I'll comment on that in a second. But I think the defensive line really won't miss a beat. I mean, this defense, the advantage they do have is they're coming into year 2 with Todd Bowles' defense. And we know that Todd Bowles likes to scheme up a lot of different things, and it's very confusing for other offenses. So the fact that the defense already has this under their belt, and they mostly have everyone back, there's not going to be as much of a learning process. So I think they'll be able to dial up some things at the beginning of the year that it'll take other teams time to see it on film before they can kind of really learn how to counteract it. Shaq Barrett's numbers might drop a little bit, but I don't think it's going to be because of a lack of effort or anything like that.
Yeah.
You got to remember, Jason Pierre-Paul is back, and he's back for 16 games. And Jason Pierre-Paul is competitive as hell. He's a very good teammate, but he's competitive as hell, and he wants to be the number 1 pass rusher on that team. So I think all season long, there's going to be a great competition between JPP and Shaq Barrett for who's going to lead the Bucs in sacks. And yeah, teams can game plan for Shaq Barrett, but they also got to worry about JPP. So one of them is not going to get double teamed because you can only keep so many guys in blocking.
Yeah.
Now, to go to the secondary, there are questions at safety. I mean, we don't know if Justin Evans is going to be back. Jason Light said that he should be ready for training camp, but I don't know necessarily how true that is. They drafted Winfield, obviously, so there will be some good competition back there, and that's the group that they really need to upgrade the most in the draft, at least on the defensive side of the ball, and they took care of that. The corners, I think, are probably one of the most interesting storylines for the Bucs going into training camp and going to this season. And we've talked about it a lot. Everyone has. They struggled in the beginning of the year, but they really turned it on late towards the end of the season. And that's the big question with these corners. Can they continue improving and progressing for the 2020 season? I mean, Carlton Davis is going into his 3rd year. You got Jamel Dean and Sean Murphy-Bunting going into their 2nd year. That's the key to the defense right there. If their secondary plays like they did in the latter half of the 2019 season, they're going to be great for 2020. And you saw someone like Carlton Davis. Remember that game he had against the Texans? He pretty much shut down DeAndre Hopkins, who is a top 3 receiver in the NFL. You can argue that he's number 1. I'm not going to argue with it. I'm not going to argue against you with that. I mean, that's just the potential that Carlton Davis has. You saw Sean Murphy-Bunting have a clutch pick 6 in Detroit, pretty much his home stadium because he's from Michigan. And you saw Jamel Dean make some big plays at the end of the year. I believe against the Cardinals, he had a really important play as well. So if this cornerback group can continue what they were doing, the Bucs defense, I don't want to say will be golden, but I mean, there's a lot of optimism there. But at times you see players in their second year, people talk about the rookie wall, but there's also a sophomore slump. So that's really going to be something that you got to keep an eye on. But there's a ton of optimism to have about the Bucs defense.
What are you thinking, Evan?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on what Matt said about Carlton Davis being in his third year. It's interesting to see how Davis plays this year, because I think with corners and with receivers, a lot of the times, and really every player, I think, a lot of times their third year is when, if they're going to be a good player, that's when they shine. Carlton Davis has already had 2 years under his belt. He's the most experienced corner, starting corner that they have. So it's going to be very interesting to see, does Carlton Davis take another leap? I think he had a solid year last year. Can he take that other leap? Because if he can, and he can become their solid number one corner, maybe not shut down. I wouldn't expect him to be a shutdown guy, even though, like you said, he did. Shut down DeAndre Hopkins. But if he can be their number one corner, I would trust Jamel Dean and Sean Murphy-Bunting to be the 2 and 3 just fine. I think the sky's the limit for a guy like Bunting right there in the slot. I think it's a perfect spot for him. I think they've really found their guys there after shuffling Vernon Hargraves and Ryan Smith and MJ Stewart. And yes, Smith and Stewart are still on the roster, but they just haven't shown enough to play cornerback as a starter for the Bucs. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm going to keep a close eye on Carlton Davis this season.
Yeah. You had brought up MJ Stewart, and before we moved on, I wanted to kind of bring up the odd man out of that cornerback room, which is MJ Stewart. I think a lot of people expected a little bit more of him last year. He's in a room with a bunch of talented guys. You saw Jamel Dean have a good season, Sean Murphy-Bunting, and of course Carlton Davis we just talked about. But what is your opinion on MJ Stewart? Do you think we see him a little bit more in the defensive backfield next season? Is he going to be more of a player on special teams with Ryan Smith? What do you expect for MJ Stewart in particular? Because a lot of question marks floating around that guy right now.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't know if you guys remember, but last year there was a big press conference before the year to make the announcement that Rondé Barber was going to be inducted into the Bucs Ring of Honor. And we all spoke with Rondé Barber after, and he said that of the Bucs corners at the time, MJ Stewart was the player that most reminded Rondé of himself, which, that's a big statement right there from the best, the defensive back that the Bucs have had in their history.
And a guy who had a terrible rookie year.
Yeah. The problem with MJ Stewart is that he's not as quick as the other corners are. So that's why they had tried to move him to safety for a little bit. MJ is mostly going to be competing for one of those depth spots at corner, and he's mostly going to be playing special teams. I like MJ. He's a good guy. There's going to be decent competition, though. There's an undrafted free agent that the Bucs have. He's from Oklahoma. His name is Parnell Motley, and John Ledyard has wrote about him. He thinks that he's got a decent chance to make the team, and it's going to be good competition there between Stewart and Motley from Oklahoma. And if there's any team that's going to bring an undrafted free agent onto the 53-man roster, it's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They've done it time and time again with DeMar Dotson and Adam Humphries and obviously Cam Brate. So I wouldn't be surprised either way if MJ either makes a team or gets cut from the team. But it's definitely going to be some competition that's going to be worth taking a look at as whenever training camp starts.
Absolutely. Evan, I know you had brought up Parnell Motley on our draft recap show. You're really high on that guy. He brings a lot to the table.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of him. I was surprised he wasn't drafted, and for the Bucs to be able to sign him as an undrafted free agent, I thought was pretty big. And just like Matt said, I think he'll be primarily competing for that cornerback 4 or 5 spot with MJ Stewart. I think Ryan Smith pretty much has a spot on the roster locked down just because he's just such a good special teams guy.
Yeah, he's a special teams wizard. I didn't mean to cut you off. But, how many times last year did he catch the punt and down it on the 1 yard line?
Yeah,
it's kind of incredible what he was able to do.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what was it. Was it this season that he was suspended for the first 4 games?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and if you notice, the special teams coverage was not as good. He came back and it got better. So I think that's how important that guy is to the special teams unit. And just like you said, I think MJ is going to have to do well on special teams and make some sort of difference there to be able to really stand out, because I think Motley has a lot of potential. Now, the thing that MJ has is he was a second-round pick 3 years ago at this point.
He was picked before Carlton Davis.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember I liked Davis more, and when they picked MJ Stewart, I was like, okay. I think it was like 5 or 6 picks later they picked Carlton Davis.
Yeah, they were close to each other.
Yeah. So I mean, and early on, if you remember MJ Stewart's rookie season, he really was shining in training camp, and just it didn't translate to the NFL, mostly because of, like Matt said, he's just not quick enough, really. And I think in the Chicago game, Week 4, that slaughter, I think that's when he really got exposed. So it's a big training camp coming up for MJ, and like I said, I hope he can make the team. I'm not sure if the Bucs will carry 6 corners. I don't know if that's a real possibility, but I think they would like to see him perform, especially Jason Light, because Jason Light put a second-round pick into that guy. He'd like to see him stay on the team for as long as possible.
Yeah. Now, it's the middle of May. I wanted to move on to this next one. It's a pretty loaded question, but expectations for the Bucs are very, very high. The schedule came out. We know the order of the games they're going to play. We know the bye week, this and that. Everybody can say what they want. And a lot of what I have seen to people reacting about this schedule is, all right, we're going to win 12, 13, 14 games maybe. And I don't know about you guys, but for me as a Bucs fan, even though we have Tom Brady, we have the pieces that we do, and I think this team is in a good position to make a deep playoff run, it's still just a weird feeling in the pit of my stomach saying that the Bucs are going to win 10-plus games this year. Because for the almost 5 years that we've been doing this podcast, they have never won more than 9 games in a season. So, with that being said, I wanted to ask you, in your opinion, is this team ready to make a run with the pieces they have? I really don't know how much more time they have to bring in some more people. I don't know if they have the cap space available. I see different numbers being thrown up everywhere. Maybe if they wanted to make a last-minute signing. But overall, the Bucs seem like they're pretty comfortable at most positions. Do you think they are good enough to make a run this year? And if they aren't, what would you change? With the time we have left in the offseason, what signings would you make? What adjustments would you make for this team to be where you think they are? But Matt, I'll go to you first. Do you think this team is ready to make a run?
I think they're absolutely capable of making a run with the weapons that they have on both offense and defense. I mean, they have some star-studded players with, as I mentioned before, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Shaq Barrett, and Levante David, and Devin White. They have some real star-studded players. So they definitely have the capability to do so. I do think that because it is going to take some time to really get chemistry with each other, I have my prediction as 10-6 for the Bucs this year, and it's kind of what you were saying, Rhett, we haven't seen this team make the playoffs in over a decade, have winning seasons. So I think we have to pump the brakes just a little bit with these 13-3 talks. I mean, even some of the best teams in the NFL don't win 8 or 9 games in a row. So the game is a series of peaks and valleys. So I think there's going to be a slip up here and there. It's just natural. It just happens in the game of football. In terms of what I kind of still want to see on this team, depth obviously is, I think, the first thing, and you can look at a couple positions for that. I mean, outside linebacker, outside of Shaq and JPP, you got sorry, I blanked on his name for a second. You got Anthony Nelson from Iowa. I mean, he's pretty much unproven because he was hurt a lot last year.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a big season for him. Can he take that role that Carl Nassib played so well last season? Because one injury and Anthony Nelson is the next guy up. I would love to see a little more depth on the offensive line. That's probably the position I would try to shore up the most because, as I just said, this offense has everything. So if you want to be as sure as possible, as confident as you could possibly be, you don't want to have any hiccups on the offensive line. And I think most people would agree. they got some things to figure out with Ronald Jones and Keyshawn Vaughn, how they're going to do that. Can Ronald Jones kind of improve in pass blocking and overall just being a receiving running back? But the offensive line, you want to make sure Tom Brady is standing upright. You want to make sure he's got the best protection possible. So I think it'd be important to kind of add depth there, or even kind of maybe give some competition to some of the starters there, like Alex Kappa could be someone. I'm not saying that he shouldn't be the starter, but maybe kind of put his feet to the fire a little bit and kind of ignite something for him to really push to become the best starter he can be. So really offensive line, I guess, would be something that I would change.
I think Alex Kappa showed a lot of improvement last year. Definitely took a major step. If he proved anything, he proved he's tough as hell because he broke his arm in the Rams game. Yeah. I feel good with him at right guard. I do think a little bit of competition would be healthy, kind of help him just play it the best he knows he can be. But, I do feel good about the offensive line. I think some depth would do well. Evan, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I just the predictions of all these 13-3 stuff. So when somebody's predicting 13-3, I'm assuming they're predicting the losses to be ones to New Orleans, Green Bay, and like Kansas City, I guess. In which case, you're going 5-1 in the division. That's hard to do. That's very difficult to do. You got some tough road games. Chicago is not an easy place to play. Denver is definitely not an easy place to play. You got those two games that could be trap games. Vegas, they could be improved. The Giants, I don't know how improved they are, but it still is a road game, and maybe the Bucs see Daniel Jones again and get haunted again. Who knows? I just think 13-3 is just when this team went 7-9 to 13-3 is such a big jump. Yeah. And I'm not saying that they can't do it because we've seen it before in the NFL. The teams go from like the 49ers. I mean, the 49ers, they had the number 2 pick. That's what I was thinking of, actually. Yeah, and now they're playing the Super Bowl. I mean, that's just unreal. I do know that obviously their starting quarterback went down and they didn't have him for most of the season when they had the number 2 pick, but I mean, still counts. So I don't think it's impossible that they can do it. I just don't see that as realistic. One unit that I would probably shore up is outside linebacker. I have said that, outside of Barrett and JPP, just not really sure where the pass rush is coming from. Like Matt said earlier, I don't know if you can expect Shaq Barrett to get 19 or 19 and a half sacks again. I just don't think that's realistic to expect that of him every season. It is going to be nice to have JPP for a full season. But, I mean, let's say, Barrett gets a nice number, 14 or so. And let's say JPP gets around 10. And Carl Nassib is gone, had about 5.5, 6 sacks last year. Mm-hmm. I just don't know if Anthony Nelson can pick that up right away, especially with him being injured. So maybe look for a guy like Clay Matthews or Terrell Suggs, or bring back a guy like Sam Acho, who was on the team last year. I think that would make a lot of sense. I know they're really tight on cap right now, but I mean, you can find money in a lot of different ways. So
the cap is a myth.
I think, a lot of teams have proven that it could be a myth. If they really wanted to sign Clay Matthews and he's asking for, $500,000 more than they can spend, they'll find some money, some way to get that done. But I'm not sure if it happens. But if I were running things, I would probably look to shore that up and just build depth. The playoff teams, I think we can all agree, the playoff teams, normally if you look at their rosters, there's depth all around. And right now, there's just offensive line is another one. There's a lot of depth questions on this team, which might, really hurt them in a long playoff run.
Yeah. When it comes to these schedule predictions at this time of year, I always like to put an asterisk next to it. I think it's way too early to sit here and go game by game, break down what you think's going to happen, because I like to wait for training camp battles to develop. You kind of get a better idea of who's going to be on the field every single week. With that being said, we are still talking about the Bucs, and going back to the schedule, it really wouldn't surprise me if they drop a game this year that nobody expected them to lose. It seems like that always happens with Tampa Bay. Look at the Giants game last year. not to say it wasn't a competitive game, but like I didn't think we were going to lose that game the way that we did.
Especially with the way they started the game.
Yeah, exactly.
They were they started that game fast. And one thing I did want to ask Matt really fast. I know on Pewter Report Roundtable they did the Bucs easiest game and Bucs hardest game. What was your easiest game and hardest game for the Buccaneers?
So the hardest game I had was the opener at New Orleans. For pretty much everything we said, that the offense isn't going to be ready yet. There's even more intense rivalry with everything that went on this offseason. And that crowd is going to be even crazier because there's been no live sports for a while. Now they get to see their team. The easiest game I had was Week 4 against the Chargers. And again, it's kind of what I already mentioned, where I think this is where the Bucs offense really starts rolling and they put up a lot of points, and the defense just kind of sinks their teeth in against either Tyrod, who's been on 3 different teams over the last 4 seasons, or a rookie in Justin Herbert that is probably going to go up against the toughest defense that he's seen just from a scheme standpoint with Todd Bowles. So I see that as the game where the Bucs just kind of they just click everywhere, where they're putting up like 30-plus points and the defense is getting to the quarterback and they're getting turnovers. So I see it as the real momentum switch for the Bucs. We're 3-1 for their first primetime game the next week against the Bears. So at New Orleans, toughest, and home against the Chargers as the easiest.
So, and one thing I wanted to bring up was like that game against the Chargers. I think the Chargers have a good amount of talent. I do think that it's not going to be they're not going to be a playoff team, but I mean, you look at their defense. There's a lot of talent on that defense. So, like even that game, I don't think any game is easy in the NFL. I could definitely see the Bucs losing that game, possibly. Tyrod Taylor, I think, is a serviceable player. And Justin Herbert, you just don't know. Could it be his first career start? Maybe. I think it all depends on if the Chargers get off to a slow start or not. I think Tyrod's going to start out, though. But, I mean, even that game, which, you said you think was the easiest out of the schedule, which, I mean, may not imply that they're definitely winning, but they could definitely lose. It wouldn't surprise me.
I agree with you. I mean, the Chargers defense is good. And I said this in the roundtable too, that there's no such thing as an easy win in the NFL. It could happen to anyone. But I think too, because they kind of go up against some tough defenses in the beginning of the year, like the week before they go up against Denver and you got to deal with Chubb and Von Miller. So that'll almost, in a way, kind of help them prepare against another very difficult pass rush in that sense.
Yep.
Alrighty, so we are going to move on to this one final question I wanted to cover before we wrap up and get out of here. This one has to do with players in particular. And Evan, I wanted to ask you first, is there a guy that you are going to have your eyes on this season? Just a little more pressure than the next guy to take that next step, per se. For me, a guy that comes to mind is O.J. Howard. I think he really has to have a good season this year. He's not, we've said it plenty of times here on the show, I know a ton of people say it, he's not necessarily a bad player, just had a bad season, and I think with Tom Brady coming in and Gronkowski, I think he's in a good tight end room, he's got a good system around him, just got to kind of work to get his confidence back up, and I hope he can take that next step because he is very athletic. But Evan, is there any guy that you're looking at in particular to just really get it together this year?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about just pressure on a guy, OJ's the easy one, right?
Yeah.
I think just because there was so many rumors of him being traded, and at one point I thought he was going to get traded. They ended up keeping him, which I think was probably the right move. But I mean, if this year, if he is another year like he did last year, he won't be on the team next year. So I'm going to go with probably a guy who, if he doesn't have a good year, he won't be on the team next year either, and that's Donovan Smith. I think, being the blindside blocker for the greatest quarterback ever, you have to be good or at least serviceable. And I do think that Smith is better than a lot of people give him credit for. He's not the worst tackle in the NFL like some fans think. The Bucs could be much worse off at tackle than Donovan Smith. But if he has a poor year, I believe all of his guaranteed money from his deal is done after this season. So they can cut him and save about $13-14 million if they want to. Slide Tristan Wirfs over to left tackle if they feel comfortable with that. And it's much easier to find a right tackle than it is to find a left. So I think Donovan Smith is the guy that I'm going to have a really close eye on.
I'm really torn between two different situations here, but I guess I'll go with and in both these situations this player isn't going to get cut, but they won't get a lot of playing time, I guess. I think it's going to be a really interesting battle for the third wide receiver between Scotty Miller and rookie 5th round pick Tyler Johnson, because Scotty Miller has the speed that Bruce Arians absolutely loves, and he's got the stature of receivers that Tom Brady is familiar with, such as Julian Edelman and Wes Welker. But Tyler Johnson, he's got the size and kind of more of the abilities that Mike Evans and Chris Godwin have, in terms of one of the best traits of his game is going up and getting after the ball when it's at like its highest peak, or as people like to say, play above the rim. And Tyler Johnson is the type of guy that plays above the rim, much like Chris Godwin and Mike Evans does. So I think it's going to be a very, very interesting competition between those two guys. And Scotty is another guy that got hampered because he had a hamstring injury for a lot of last season. So we haven't even really seen him to his full potential. But with that said, he got some playing time, and he got hurt again, but he had some playing time when Mike Evans and Chris Godwin were out, and he had a touchdown, and Jameis was looking at him. So now he gets almost a fresh start with a new quarterback and a new season, and we'll see if he gels pretty good with Brady. So I think Tyler Johnson and Scotty Miller for 2020 is a really interesting matchup to see.
So one question I did have for Matt following that is, so obviously Tyler Johnson, Scotty Miller, whoever wins the wide receiver 3 spot naturally goes to wide receiver 4. Do you think that Justin Watson's pretty much locked into that wide receiver 5 spot, or could he potentially maybe move up or maybe even get cut?
Yeah, I wouldn't say he's locked into that 5th spot at all, really. I mean, I think another guy to keep your name on is Bryant Mitchell. He got hurt in the preseason game against the Steelers last year. So the first preseason game of the year, and he was done for the entire season. But even when he was out, I mean, he did a ton of rehab here. He was in the locker room all the time. He's pretty well liked by a lot of his teammates. And Bruce Arians said that he was a good player that was in the running and in the competition for one of those last wide receiver spots last training camp. So now that he's fully healthy, I think that'll be a decent battle between him and Justin Watson for the 5th spot. And, Justin Watson, his case was interesting because he's a solid special teams player, and we saw that he started taking the punt returns when everyone else was hurt at the end of the season. He has some really good practices, but then he wasn't able to translate it over into the game, in the preseason, really. He had some drops in the preseason. And you didn't really see it too much in the regular season either. So the biggest thing for Justin Watson is really going to take those good practices that he's had. And he's had some really good practices in training camp, but he's got to show it in the preseason games too. I don't think he's a lock by any means for the 5th receiver spot. And it's going to be, obviously special teams makes a big difference with this. So we'll see what Brian Mitchell can really do with special teams. And that'll be something that I'm kind of paying attention to a little more this training camp as well.
I am definitely excited for training camp to come back around. That is the highlight of what it's all there for, is watching those positional battles take place. The guys that aren't necessarily household names really, going out there and playing their asses off for a spot that just doesn't get all the glory in the world, but it's always very entertaining to watch. With that being said, I believe that's just about going to do it for this episode of the Cannon Fire podcast. First off, Matt, thank you so much for joining us, man. It has been a pleasure talking to you. And let the people know where they can find you and some of the work that you do.
Yeah, you could find my work on pewterreport.com, where I'm writing a lot of stories there as the Bucs beat writer. I'm also the editor and producer extraordinaire, as my boss, Mark Cook, would like to say, on the Bucs Pewter Nation podcast. Make sure you're following us at Pewter Report on Twitter And my personal Twitter account is at Matty4_Matera. And thank you guys a lot for having me on. It's been great talking to you.
Heck yeah, man. Always a good time talking Buccaneer football, especially this time of year when there is just not that much going on. It reminds us exactly why we're here and what we've got to look forward to. So thank you for jumping on with us and giving us a great episode. You can follow the show. You can follow the show on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All of those are Cannon Fire Podcast. You can follow myself on Instagram and Twitter at Rhettakus, RHETTAKUS. If you follow me, I promise I'll follow you back. And you can find my co-host, Evan, on Instagram and Twitter. Instagram at Bucs.wave, the #1 Buccaneers fan page on Instagram. And on Twitter at EvanNFL, where he tweets about the Sixers and other Philly teams that nobody really cares about. So... How's the Instagram game going, by the way, while I ask?
It's going good. I think 24.4K, I think, right now.
We're getting there. By the way...
Still getting close to the 25K goal by the season. So
you're going to hit 25K before the end of the month. Don't even lie to yourself, man. Really quickly, I did want to give a special shout out to our viewers on YouTube. Just yesterday, we hit 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, something we've been working for since we started the show and a huge milestone for us. So I wanted to say thank you to each and every one of you who have subscribed. And if you are watching right now and you have not subscribed, just go ahead and click that button. It's free. It doesn't cost you a damn thing. And make sure you hit the bell so you can be notified whenever we go live or upload a new episode just like this one. Another quick shout out, our friends at Shooter and the Stash. I don't know if you guys saw it on Twitter, but I was animated in a few different forms, which was pretty cool. So I promised him I'd give him a shout on our next show. Make sure you guys go check that out. They put out a ton of animations revolving around Tampa Bay as a whole, not even just Bucs football, but they've got plenty of that to tickle your fancy as well. Last but not least, we need to give a special shout out to our sponsor, Pinecrest Printing and Signs. You are well aware by now, but the world is still a crazy place. Things are starting to reopen, which is looking good, but Pinecrest Printing and Signs in Brandon, Florida has been open for the entirety of everything that's been going on, and they are still open, helping you get the best out of your business and presentation. These guys handle everything. They do it for us as well. They do apparel, stickers, banners, metal signs, giant signs, vehicle wraps, business cards, anything and everything under the sun to make you look as professional as possible. RJ and his experienced staff are going to make it happen. They are located in the Brandon area and have been helping out the Tampa Bay business community since 2001. You can give them a call at 813-684-5444, or you can check out their website at pinecrestprintingandsigns.com. They might even hook you up if you let them know that you heard about them right here on the Cannon Fire Podcast. With that being said, I am Rhett Matthew signing off for Mr. Matt Matera and Evan Wanish. Thank you guys for listening to our show, and we'll catch you next time. Go Bucs!